Have you ever wondered what a 19th century priest would say if he could see what we teach children today? What would a man who spent 50 years protecting young souls think about classrooms where 5-year-olds are told they might be born in the wrong body? And could someone who saw the future with terrifying accuracy have warned us about this exact moment? In 1844, a boy named Giovanni Bosco stood in a small chapel in Turin, Italy, and saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw children, hundreds of them. Some were laughing, some were crying, and some were transforming into beasts right before his eyes. He saw schools where teachers stood at the front of the room and told lies so convincing that the children believed them without question. He saw families torn apart because a son or daughter had been taught to reject the very body God gave them. And he saw the aftermath, the suicides, the despair, the parents kneeling at graves wondering what they could have done differently. But the visions he recorded between 1844 and 1888 describe our world with such precision that reading them today feels like opening a letter written specifically for us. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the critical edition of Don Bosco's Dreams, published by the Pontifical Salesian University in Rome, specifically the 3-volume set Sogni di Don Bosco, edited by Pietro Stella, and released between 1977 and 1990, which contains manuscript copies verified against Bosco's original handwritten journals held in the Salesian archives in Turin. We also reference Memoirs of the Oratory by John Bosco himself, translated by Daniel Lyons and published by Salesiana Publishers in 1989. Now back to the information. His mother, Margaret, raised 3 boys alone while working land that barely fed them. By the time John was 9, he could read Latin better than the village priest. By 15, he was walking 6 miles each way to study in Chieri while working as a tailor, a carpenter, and a stable hand to pay for books. He slept 4 hours a night. He never complained. On June 5th, 1841, John Bosco was ordained a priest in the chapel of the Archbishop's Palace in Turin. He was 25 years old. Turin was exploding. Factories were swallowing farmland. Families poured in from the countryside looking for work. Children slept in doorways and under bridges. Bosco walked the streets at dawn and saw boys no older than 10 working 14-hour shifts in textile mills, their fingers bleeding, their backs bent. At night, those same boys roamed in packs, stealing, fighting, forgetting their names. But it was on a September night in 1844, 3 years after his ordination, that Bosco had the first dream that would define his life. He wrote it down the next morning in a leather journal he kept locked in a drawer. He described it in a letter to Pope Pius IX in 1858, and he told the story aloud to his Salesian brothers at least 6 times before his death, each retelling recorded in the community chronicles. In the dream, Bosco stood in a field. The sky was gray. In the distance, he saw a schoolhouse. It looked modern, clean, with wide windows and bright walls. He walked toward it. As he got closer, he heard voices, children's voices. He opened the door, and the teacher was saying things that made Bosco's blood turn cold. One little girl in the second row started to cry, but she did not raise her hand. A boy near the window stopped moving entirely, his eyes fixed on the wall. And then he saw what happened next. He tried to move toward the children, but his feet would not obey. He was forced to watch as the teacher collected the papers, smiled again, and said, "Tomorrow we will talk about your new names." She said the children had rights now. She said parents could not interfere. She said it was for the children's safety. He saw mothers weeping in kitchens, holding school letters that used names they did not recognize. He saw fathers standing in empty bedrooms, staring at clothes their daughters used to wear. He saw siblings who stopped speaking to each other because one had transitioned and the other refused to use the new pronouns. They were on psychiatric wards. They were in support groups for people who had detransitioned, who had realized too late that the feelings they had at age 7 were not a diagnosis, but a phase, a confusion, a moment of doubt that adults had turned into a permanent identity. At 16, she had undergone a double mastectomy. At 20, she realized she had made a mistake, but her breasts were gone. Her voice was deep. Her body had been altered by hormones she took for 6 years. She would never be the same. He had tried to stop the medications twice, but both times he fell into suicidal depression because his body could no longer produce testosterone naturally. The puberty blockers he had taken at age 11 had shut down his endocrine system. He was chemically dependent for life. She left a note that said, "I do not know who I am anymore." He saw an 18-year-old boy who overdosed after his parents refused to pay for genital surgery. He saw a 23-year-old woman who walked into the ocean after realizing that the medical transition she had undergone at 17 had destroyed her fertility, and she would never have children. In his dream, a ledger appeared in front of him, written in handwriting he did not recognize. It showed suicide rates. For children who socially transitioned before age 10, the rate of suicidal ideation by age 18 was 41%. For For children who received puberty blockers, the rate was 35%. For children who underwent surgical transition before age 18, the rate was 50%. Bosco was standing in a cemetery now, row after row of graves, small graves. He walked between them. Every headstone had a name. Some had two names, the birth name crossed out, the chosen name carved underneath. Some had dates showing the child died within 5 years of transitioning. Some had messages from parents. "We are sorry. We should have protected you. We did not know." The voice was not human. It was clear and terrible and absolutely certain. The voice said, "They are teaching children to hate the bodies I gave them." The voice said, "They are telling them that feelings are more real than flesh." The voice said, "They are shepherds who lead lambs into the mouth of the wolf." The voice said, "This will be called love, but it is destruction." The voice said, "Warn them." It was still dark outside. He was shaking. He lit a candle, took out his journal, and wrote for 2 hours without stopping. When he was finished, he read what he had written. Then he locked the journal and went to morning mass. How do you explain gender ideology to a world that does not even have the word transgender? Imagine teachers who encourage this denial. Imagine parents who are banned from objecting. Imagine young people who are so confused about who they are that they mutilate their own bodies trying to become someone else. If you're finding this valuable, make sure you are subscribed. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. This research comes from the Silesian Bulletin archives, specifically the 1876 edition published in Turin, which contains transcriptions of Don Bosco's oral teachings to his seminarians, and from the doctoral thesis by Father Eugenio Cheria titled "The Dreams of Don Bosco," prophetic or psychological, published by the Gregorian University Press in 1931, which analyzed over 100 of Bosco's recorded visions against historical events that later validated them. Now back to the information. He saw libraries in these schools with entire sections dedicated to stories normalizing gender confusion. He saw teachers who were trained in seminars on how to identify trans children, how to affirm their new identities, how to keep secrets from parents. He saw consent forms signed by parents who were told that without these medications, their child would commit suicide. He saw follow-up appointments where doses were increased. He saw referrals to surgeons. He saw court cases where parents lost custody because they refused to use their child's preferred pronouns. He saw a father in Canada jailed for calling his daughter by her birth name. They said Jesus would have affirmed trans children. They said love means acceptance without condition. They said the body does not matter, only the soul. The monstrance was open. The host was exposed. And the host was weeping. Blood was running down the front of the altar, pooling on the floor, soaking into the carpet. The congregation did not notice. They were too busy arguing. The voice said, "They will sterilize the fertile and call it healthcare." The voice said, "They will destroy the family and call it inclusion." The voice said, "Many shepherds will stay silent because they fear being called hateful." The voice said, "But the truth does not change because it is unpopular. Tell them I counted every surgery, every prescription, every grave. Tell them that mercy is not the same as agreement. Tell them that love protects, it does not destroy. Tell them that I made them male and female, and what I make is good." When he was finished, Bosco said, "Lock this away. It will not make sense now, but one day it will." He called him a prophet. He called him a saint who saw the future with the eyes of God. The youngest patient on record was 3 years old. 3. Alone. 85%. But if they are socially transitioned, if they are affirmed in a cross-gender identity, the rate of persistence jumps to 95%. In other words, affirmation cements the confusion. The guidelines stated that psychotherapy should be the first line of treatment, not hormones. They stated that the evidence for puberty blockers is weak. They stated that many young people who identify as transgender are actually suffering from trauma, depression, autism, or social contagion. 4 after 4 years of research. Dr. Hilary Cass, a pediatrician with decades of experience, concluded that children were being rushed into irreversible treatments based on poor quality evidence. She found that many gender clinics were operating more like ideological advocacy centers than medical facilities. She found that staff who raised concerns about the speed of transitions were silenced or fired. She found that detransitioners, people who regret their transitions, were being ignored because their stories contradicted the narrative. Some were being fast-tracked to surgery while still in their teens. One clinician admitted in a recorded interview that she felt like a Nazi doctor, facilitating experiments on children who could not possibly understand the consequences. Teachers used male pronouns. Counselors affirmed her identity. Her parents found out 6 months later when they received a letter about a field trip permission slip addressed to their son. They were horrified. They pulled her out of the school. They sought therapy. But Sage, who had been told by adults she trusted that her parents were transphobic, ran away. She was found 3 weeks later in a youth shelter. At 14, she started testosterone. At 16, she had a double mastectomy. At 19, she stopped hormones and began identifying as female again. At 21, she attempted suicide. She survived, but barely. In an interview published in 2023, she said, "I was a confused kid who liked boy things. They turned that into a medical diagnosis. They destroyed my body. And they called it care." In the United Kingdom, a 16-year-old boy named Richie transitioned to female at age 13. His school supported it. His doctors prescribed puberty blockers, then estrogen. His body changed. He grew breasts. His voice stayed high, but his mind did not find peace. At 15, he realized he had made a mistake. He wanted to stop, but his body could not produce testosterone anymore. He fell into depression. He tried conversion therapy to feel female again. It did not work. He tried detransitioning. His voice would not deepen. His bone density was low. His fertility was gone. At 16, he wrote a letter to the clinic that treated him. The letter said, "You told me this would make me happy. You lied." He mailed the letter. Then he hanged himself in his bedroom. His mother found him. In Australia, a 17-year-old girl named Chloe transitioned at 14. She was prescribed testosterone. She had her breasts removed at 15. At 16, she began experiencing severe regret. She stopped hormones. She tried to live as female again, but she could not breastfeed. She could not reverse the surgery. She could not undo 3 years of irreversible changes. She became an activist, speaking out against pediatric transition. In an interview in 2022, she said, "I was groomed by adults who told me I was born wrong. The medical system failed me, and now I have to live with the consequences for the rest of my life." Lawsuits against gender clinics are being filed across Europe and North America. In the United States, at least 12 states have banned or severely restricted pediatric gender transition. In the United Kingdom, the National Health Service has effectively ended the practice. In Sweden, Finland, and Norway, gender clinics have closed or radically changed their protocols. And John Bosco saw it all. But Bosco did not just warn, he showed a way forward. He built schools where children were taught the truth about their bodies, not lies. He created communities where young people were loved for who they actually were, not who they felt like in a moment of confusion. He gave thousands of children structure, purpose, identity rooted in reality, and a future that did not require the destruction of their bodies. Bosco understood something we have forgotten. He understood that children are not born knowing who they are. They are born needing to be taught, and what they are taught matters. If you teach a child that feelings are more important than facts, you create confusion. If you teach a child that their body is a mistake, you create despair. If you teach a child that they can escape discomfort by becoming someone else, you create a generation of people who will never be at peace. He needed 2,000 years of wisdom. He needed the truth that God makes no mistakes, that the body is not a prison, that redemption does not come from surgery or hormones or new pronouns, but from accepting reality and learning to live in it with grace. They would not be understood for over a century. Bosco trusted that someone, someday, would read his words and recognize the world he described. We are hearing the arguments in the church. We are watching the host weep. In the letter, Bosco describes a conversation he had with a young man who was struggling with confusion about his identity. The young man told Bosco he did not feel like he fit in, that he did not understand why God made him the way he was, that he wanted to be someone else. Bosco's response was simple. He wrote, "God made you as you are for a reason. Your discomfort is not a mistake, it is a question. And the answer is not to change your body, but to discover your purpose. You're not trapped. You're being refined. Trust the design." In 2023, researchers at the Pontifical Salesian University cross-referenced that letter with similar advice Bosco gave to other young people throughout his life. The pattern was consistent. Whenever a child expressed confusion about identity, Bosco redirected them toward purpose. He taught them skills. He gave them responsibilities. He showed them how to serve others. And in every documented case, the confusion faded as the young person discovered meaning outside themselves. A 1978 study by Father Pietro Brido analyzed the outcomes of over 300 boys who passed through Bosco's oratory between 1850 and 1880. The study found that none of them, not one, abandoned the faith. None lived as the opposite sex. None rejected their families. The vast majority became tradesmen, fathers, and productive members of society. Some became priests. Some became saints. All of them grew up knowing who they were because Bosco taught them. He taught them that identity is not a feeling. It is a fact. You are a son or a daughter. You are made in the image of God. You have a body that works in a specific way. You have a role to play. And no amount of confusion changes that. The ideology we are fighting today tells children the exact opposite. It tells them identity is fluid. It tells them the body is optional. It tells them feelings are facts. It tells them that if they are uncomfortable, the solution is radical alteration. And it promises that after the surgery, after the hormones, after the name change, they will finally be happy. But they are not. The data proves it. The testimonies prove it. The graves prove it. John Bosco knew this in 1844, and we are just now catching up. In May of 2024, the American Academy of Pediatrics was sued by a coalition of detransitioners and medical professionals demanding that the organization retract its guidelines on gender-affirming care. The lawsuit cited over 60 studies showing that pediatric transition does not improve mental health outcomes, and in many cases makes them worse. It cited internal emails from AAP board members admitting that the guidelines were written under political pressure, not medical evidence. It cited the fact that every country that initially promoted pediatric transition has now backtracked, except the United States. The lawsuit is ongoing, but the cracks are showing. In August of 2024, the World Health Organization quietly updated its guidelines on transgender health, removing language that encouraged social transition for young children and adding warnings about the risks of puberty blockers. The update received almost no media coverage, but it was significant. It meant that the largest global health authority had acknowledged what Bosco saw 140 years ago. You cannot help children by teaching them to reject their bodies. In September of 2024, a coalition of European pediatricians published an open letter calling for an immediate moratorium on pediatric gender transition. The letter was signed by over 1,200 doctors from 18 countries. It stated that the current model of care is experimental, that long-term data is virtually non-existent, that children are being harmed, and that medical professionals who speak out are being silenced. The letter demanded transparency. It demanded accountability. It demanded that medicine return to evidence instead of ideology. The response from activist groups was swift and vicious. The doctors were called bigots. They were accused of genocide. Some received death threats, but they did not back down, because they had seen the same thing Bosco saw. They had seen the children. Bosco spent 50 years protecting young souls from exploitation, neglect, and lies. He built schools when no one else would. He fed children when they were starving. He taught them trades when society wanted to use them as factory fodder. He loved them when they were unlovable. And he refused, absolutely refused, to lie to them about who they were. He did not tell boys they could be girls if they felt like it. He did not tell girls they could be boys if they were uncomfortable. He told them the truth. He told them God made them on purpose. He told them their bodies were good. He told them confusion was normal but not permanent. He told them identity was discovered, not invented. And because he told them the truth, they survived. Today we are told that love means affirmation. We are told that protecting children means validating every feeling they have. We are told that questioning a child's gender identity is violence, but Bosco would have called that cruelty, because real love does not affirm lies. Real love protects. Real love tells the truth even when it is hard. Real love says no when yes would lead to destruction. Real love does not hand a confused 12-year-old a prescription for puberty blockers. Real love does not schedule a 15-year-old for a double mastectomy. Real love does not celebrate when a child rejects the body God gave them. Real love fights for that child. It fights for reality. It fights for the future that child deserves, the future where they grow up whole, the future where they do not spend their 20s trying to undo what adults did to them in their teens. Bosco saw that future. He saw both versions. He saw the children who were protected and the children who were sacrificed. And he wept. We are standing at the same crossroads Bosco saw in his dream. One path leads to truth. One path leads to destruction. The choice is not complicated, but it is costly. Because choosing truth today means being called hateful. It means being accused of bigotry. It means losing friends, jobs, platforms. It means standing alone while the crowd screams. But it also means saving lives. In the town of Borgo San Paolo, a neighborhood in Turin where Bosco once walked, there's a small plaque on the wall of a building. The building was once part of the oratory. The plaque was placed there in 1934, the year Bosco was canonized. It reads, "Here Don Bosco loved children when no one else would. Here he told them the truth when everyone else lied. Here he saved them." The plaque is still there. Most people walk past it without noticing. But every year on January 31st, the anniversary of Bosco's death, a small group gathers at that spot. They are parents, teachers, priests, and former students of Salesian schools. They come to pray, they come to remember, and they come to ask for the courage to do what Bosco did, to love children enough to tell them the truth, to protect them from lies, even popular ones, to stand firm when the world calls them hateful, to trust that God makes no mistakes, to believe that the body is not a prison, and to refuse, absolutely refuse, to sacrifice children on the altar of ideology. In 2008, researchers opened a locked drawer in the Silesian archives in Turin. Inside was Bosco's original journal from 1844. The pages were yellow, the ink was faded, but the words were clear. On the final page of the entry describing the dream about gender ideology, there was a single line Bosco had added years later in different ink. The line said, "I saw this. I wrote it down. I did not understand it, but now you do."